So the iPad 7th generation came out so many years ago, and now we're in 2025, we're in a brand new year. So let's go and see how this particular iPad, let's see how the iPad 7th generation holds up in 2025. Now, number one, right, here's the thing. I definitely do think the iPad 7th generation is an interesting iPad. Now, is it still worth buying? Let's take a look. If you do want to go and pick up some iPads that I would recommend buying this year though, links will be down in the description below. You can pick it up from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad 7th generation, this iPad first came out in 2019. So it definitely is showing its age quite a bit. It definitely is an older styling of iPad. And that is kind of what's going to happen if you're going to go through and pick up this type of device, right? It's an older styling of iPad and that's kind of what it is. You're going to be getting a very large 10.2 inch IPS LCD panel. So it's a very big size panel. It's a very nice size panel too. So that's kind of what's going to end up happening here if you're going to go through and like pick up this type of panel, right? That is kind of a nice thing going on here. Now you're also still going through and you're still getting like pretty big bezels on the top and bottom. So that is essentially somewhat, it's not a problem, but that is kind of a downside of going through and like, buying this type of iPad because it is a very, very outdated type of iPad. So once again, that is essentially what's going through and going on if you're going to go through and buy this type of iPad is that it is a pretty outdated type of device when it comes down to it. You're still getting the fingerprint sensor on this thing too. On the bottom of this iPad, you're still going to be getting a lightning port. So you're getting a lightning port and you're getting a headphone jack on this type of device as well. So it is nice to be able to go through and get, a headphone jack and a lightning port if you really want it. So that right there in and of itself is another one of those big things to kind of keep in mind here as well. Now, on top of that, on the backside, you're still getting this solid, aluminum back. It's still giving you this camera setup on the top left corner. And overall, it still looks like a pretty nice iPad, right? Like it definitely shows its age because it is giving you really thick bezels on the top and the bottom of this thing. But that's kind of what's going through. If you're going to go through and pick up this type of iPad, that's kind of what's going on here. So essentially, in my personal opinion, that's kind of what's going on in this particular situation. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here is how this iPad compares against the competition, right? How does this iPad compare against some of the other iPads that are around it, like the newer ones? Number one, this iPad is missing out on basically a big amount of, refresh rate that a lot of phones have nowadays. So you are basically missing out on that in this day and age. So most phones nowadays are basically giving you higher refresh rate panels, and you are missing out on that on this type of device. On top of that, you're missing out on USB Type-C. That is another very big difference that we basically have on a lot of iPads nowadays. Unfortunately, on this one, we do not have it. And on top of that, we are not getting multiple camera setups. There's not like Apple Pencil support on this thing. You do get Apple Pencil 1 support, but you're missing out on Apple Pencil 2 support, things like that. So that is somewhat of a problem that you're kind of experiencing on this type of device too. So again, not the biggest deal in the world, but that is kind of one of those things you're going to be experiencing here on this type of device. Now moving on to the price tag, this iPad as of this point is basically going through and it's not really it's not the most expensive iPad of all time, but it is also still like a decent priced iPad when it comes down to it. So this type of iPad as of this point, it's going to be costing you around like less than $200 to buy. And it's probably going to be closer to maybe something like $150 right now, maybe even less than that. So because of that, once again, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to go ahead and, it might make a lot of sense, to buy this iPad from that standpoint. But in other ways, it also just doesn't really make a lot of sense to buy these iPads either. Like I feel like there are probably better devices to go and buy from a price tag standpoint too. So that's just kind of what ends up happening when you're going to go through and pick up this type of device when it comes down to it. So from that side as well, that kind of covers it up there too. Now, on top of that, when it comes down to the whole entire camera side of this particular iPad, this device is giving you an 8 megapixel standard camera on the backside, and it's giving you a 1.2 megapixel standard camera on the front. So this type of iPad, right, it's giving you a decent camera on the backside when it comes down to it. So 1080p at 30, that is, I would say, decent for a 2019 iPad, but this is not a good camera, right? This is just not a good camera anymore. You are missing out on multiple camera setups on the backside. You're missing out on a higher refresh rate panel, like camera that you can go and record in. And even the front camera, 1.2 megapixels, 720p, you are definitely going to be getting an iPad here that is showing its age. This is not a camera where you would be surprised at how good it is for how old it is. That is not what's going on here. So that right there, once again, is just one of those things you're going to have to kind of keep in mind here. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but if you are going to go through and pick up an iPad, that is one thing you're going to be noticing here, is that the camera just really isn't that great here. So kind of keep that in mind when it comes down to it. Now on top of that, some other big things to keep in mind here too. Software longevity. So as of me making this video, this device is basically done getting software support. So as of me making this video, it looks like this iPad is still supported with software, which is kind of crazy because it has the same chipset as something like the iPad, like the iPhone 7, which is kind of crazy. So that is one of those things to kind of keep in mind here. So as of this point with an iPad, so when you are going to go through it and pick up something like an iPad 7th generation, you are still going to be getting the latest and greatest software, which is kind of crazy, but it is going to be a very limited version of iPad OS. So keep that in mind. It's not going to be like the highest, end version of the software. It's going to be fairly a little bit limited. You're not going to be getting Apple Intelligence or anything like that, but it still is like an interesting version of software, and it's definitely not like a bad version of software by any means at all. So I do think from that side, it's just one of those things to kind of keep in mind there, because it is kind of a nice thing going on for this type of phone or this type of iPad. But I would probably say on top of those things, when you are going to go through and pick up this type of iPad, you are probably going to be noticing that within this type of device, it is somewhat going to be somewhat of a limited type of experience, and you might not be getting that great of an experience when it comes down to it either. So I do think from this side, it's one of those things to keep in mind. I've always noticed that the battery life of these iPads is always pretty decent. So you are probably going to be noticing a battery life on this device is going to be pretty good too. So I think this in and of itself is one of those really, really nice things to keep in mind here too. And finally, when it comes down to the performance, this device is going to be giving you the Apple A10 Fusion chip inside of it with 3 gigabytes of RAM. So I would say personally for me, it is a really, really nice type of performing iPad for how old it is. But like I said before, these types of iPads do tend to show their age nowadays. And the good thing about these types of iPads is that they do actually end up giving you this gesture-based design, even though it has a home button. I've always found that kind of interesting, but I've always loved that about iPads. iPhones didn't give you that, but iPads do give you the home button and gesture design both. So I think this is a really nice thing going on here. So if you are going to go through and pick up a device, you are actually going to be getting a pretty decent type of experience here. At least from, for how old this phone is, it's going to be a decent performing device. Definitely not perfect, but I think it's going to be okay for the most part. But that's not really the part of this iPad that I hate the most. Honestly, the part that I hate the most about this type of iPad is probably when it comes down to basically the standard types of, just the longevity of this type of device. This device really isn't going to be, supported forever. It's not going to be here for that much longer. It's probably going to be getting one more version of iPad OS and that's it. So when you are going to go through and pick up a device, you are probably going to be experiencing, still an iPad that's still there. But if you're going to go and buy an iPad, why buy something like this, right? I think it makes a lot more sense to go and buy an iPad that still has a future ahead of it. And in this particular situation, I just don't think this is one of those types of devices that I would look at and recommend people to buy from that standpoint. Like I said, I think it's still here, it's still supported and everything like that, but I think you're much better off buying a device that is still supported with software that does have kind of a future ahead of it. And I definitely do think this is not really one of those ones that I would recommend people to buy. I think an iPad 9th generation is better, an iPad 10th generation is better. Things like that is probably the way I would recommend people to kind of think about. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.